Today we're going to be taking a look at creating some Devise user accounts. We're going to extend some of the functionality and add in a username. And while we do that, we're going to take a look under the hood so it's a bit easier to understand why we have to do the things that we do when we extend Devise. And then we'll also associate the user account with our blog posts, and we'll add a view counter to both. So let's go ahead and let's get started. I start my Rails server in its current state, and then I refresh our application. We'll see that I have some pending migrations, so I'll just run those, and now we're on the home page. Now, last time when I left you, I mentioned creating a link to the blog posts, so let's go do that. If we come into app, views, and the posts, and then we come down to index.html.erb, this is the page we want to link to. So if we come over to our pages and our home page, we can link to it right here. We can just say, oh, it's actually already suggesting it. We can say link to blog and then the blog path, but it's not our blog path. This is going to be our posts path. And the reason for that is the index is going to be plural and the rest of the routes are going to be singular. So if we refresh, we have our blog link right here, which takes us to our blog. Now, if we come back here, we can give this some styling because we have Bootstrap installed, and we can say this is a btn-primary. Save that, and now we have our blog link. We can do something similar. We just add in a class here, and we'll make this a secondary link. And now we have an about link that takes us to our about page and a link to our blog. Now we should probably seed this blog, which we had set up last time. So let's run a Rails db:/seed command to seed the database, and then a Rails s to start the server again. We can refresh, and we'll see that we have 10 different blogs here that are off by one. And now we can go ahead and we can get started. The first thing I'd like to do is let's fix our dropdown up here because right now this isn't going to work. And the reason is we actually need some Bootstrap JavaScript installed to get this functional. So if we come back over to the Bootstrap page, which we can find by going to Google and just typing Bootstrap 5 and clicking on the intro to Bootstrap 5, we can scroll past the CSS link and just grab the JS bundle, click copy, and then we can come over to our layouts and our application.html.erb, and we'll just insert this below our CSS link. We can save that, refresh, and then our dropdown should work. But we need to align our dropdown so that it's visible on the screen. And if I open up this same thing in my other monitor, I believe I set this up. If we come into our navbar, we can come down to this UL with a navbar nav, and then our UL with a class of dropdown menu. And in here we want to say this is a dropdown-menu-lg-end. And as far as I remember, what this means is if I refresh, it will be a left aligned menu it'll be a right aligned menu unless your screen is a large enough size to fit it. So I think this will keep it on screen and it won't overflow. So this is where we'll do our user accounts. But what I want to do in here for now is we can just create a link to a new blog post. So in our dropdown at the top here, we'll just do a li, and let me bump this up so you can see what I'm doing. I'll just full screen this. We'll do an li, and then we'll create a link to, this is going to be new post. And then we'll say this is going to be the new post path. And then we need to give this a class that's the same as the classes that we have down here. So I'll just grab this dropdown-item, put it in there, and hit save. Now, if I refresh, we should have the ability to create a new post. So we click this, it takes us to our new post page. Let's come into our new post page. So we'll open up our Explorer, come down to pages, posts, and the new. And this is also going to be affected by the edit one. So we're going to have to change that as well. All I want to do in here is I want to make this be a .container. Just because I want to keep it a little bit cleaner. So if we save that and refresh, it'll now be pushed over to the center. So let's grab this and come over to our edit page, and we'll do the same thing. So we'll come up to the top, put the div container, and then we'll come down here and paste our div there, do our formatting. And now if we come back to our blog posts, we click on show post, and then we click on edit post. That'll also work. So that's a little bit better. Now let's make it so that when we view a post, we actually get this title to display. Now let's add a link to the top that takes us to this post page. So we already have one here. We just want to do the same thing up in this nav bar. Well, if we come into our home page real fast, we can just grab this link to our blog. We'll copy it. And then we can come into our nav bar inside of our app views layouts. Click on nav bar. We can come up to where our about page is, and then I guess before the about page, we can do another nav item. And let me just do this, li with a class equal to nav-item. And then we can paste in our link and then close our li. Now this isn't going to work because we do still need to change some stuff. So the way that this is set up right now, we have a link to our blog, which is the post path. That's fine, but we do need to change this class. So let's change this class, and we can come over here, refresh, and we now have a link to our blog. We can go home, go to our blog, go to our about page. So now let's do the views. Well, the views are going to be stored in the database, so we're going to have to stop our server with Control-C, and I'll bump this up so you can see, and then I'll full screen this. So in order to store this in our database, we need to generate a migration. And this is going to be named in a weird way, but the basic idea is we're going to say add underscore, and then whatever we're adding. So we're going to add views underscore to underscore, and then whatever we're adding views to. So we're adding views to our posts, and our views are going to be of type integer. Now we're going to run this migration or this generator, but we're not going to run the Rails DB migrate yet. So we're going to exit our full screen. We'll come over to our Explorer. And then let me just collapse everything. We're going to come up to our DB migrate and this latest migration, which is the add views to posts. And then in here at the end, we're just going to say this is going to have a comma default :0. So by default, it's going to be set to 0. And you'll see why in a second here. So now if we close this, we can run our Rails DB :migrate command to migrate our database. And we can run a Rails S command to start our server. And if we refresh, we won't have any views. Well, that's because we need to display them. So let's do that. So let's come over to our project. We'll come into our posts show. And in here, what we can do, if I click on this, is right below the title. That's actually going to be in our post partial because we're rendering at post. So we have to come into our underscore form.html.drb. And in here, so we're going to have to come into our underscore post.html.erb. And here below the title, what we can do is we can just create a H6, close the H6, and then in here we'll just do a post.views, and then we'll close this. So if we save that, we can now see our views, but we want it to like say the word views maybe. So let's do that. We'll say this should pluralize the @post.views, comma, and then whatever you want this to be. So in this case, I'm going to put the word view, and then I'll close this. And this is going to do something where if it's 0, it's going to say view with plural, so it's going to be views. If you have one view, as in this number is 1, this word will be singular. And if it's 2 or more, then it'll go back to plural again. So it's just a handy little helper to make sure you don't have to do a check there to make sure your grammar is correct. Now, once again, I would like to take all of this. So we're going to come into our show page again. And I would just like to pad this. So I'm going to say we don't need this notice here. We already have a notice, or we're going to create a notice in a minute here. So I guess I should leave it for now. And then we'll just do a dot container, and then we'll pad all of this. That'll pad everything over. So, okay, now we have these views, but every time I click refresh, it's not changing. Why not? Well, we need to come into our controller and actually update this. So if we come up to our app, controllers, post controller, then we scroll up to the top, we have our show page. So we're going to backspace this semicolon out. And in here, what we're going to do is we're going to say @post.update. And we're going to do views : @post.views +1. So what this does is instead of doing, like we have two options here. Instead of doing something like So instead of doing something like views equals at post dot views plus 1, and then doing at post dot views equal views, and then doing at post dot save, we're sort of combining all of this into one call where we do update, and then that update is the same thing as doing save right now, and then we pass in the views, and then inside of this, we're then saying the views should be equal to at post.views plus 1. So all of that is done in this one line, and then we can save this. And now if we come over here and refresh, you'll see in our console, it says update posts. It sets our updated at time, which is neat, but it also does our views, and it just sets that to be plus 1. So every time I refresh, this will increment by 1. So you can sit here and spam this. Now, if we come back to our blog, you can see that we're rendering these views here. And we're doing that because we put the views in our post partial. So anywhere where you render this post, all of those changes are going to propagate throughout your application. So there's only a single point of change here. So that's really neat. But now what happens if I go into new post? Like I can do this even if I open up an incognito tab and go to /post/new. You, of course, only want certain people to be able to create posts, I'd imagine. So we're going to have to create some user accounts. Now, this is going to use a gem called Devise, which you can find by going to Google and typing Devise gem. And then you'll see this heart combo Devise GitHub repo. You can click on this and then scroll down. Let me full screen this. And this is basically just a gem that has a whole bunch of stuff that you can use for your user accounts. So it's going to come pre-built with your passwords already being encrypted. You won't even be able to see them, which is good for your users because it means you can't just farm their password and email combinations. But it also means you don't have to create all the encryption yourself. It also has the ability to confirm emails through, or confirm user registrations through emails if you set it up, which is a pretty simple setup. You can recover accounts. You can, you can do all the basic stuff that you expect with a user account in other applications, but it sort of comes out of the box here with just a little bit of setup. So if you scroll down to the getting started, it'll tell you the steps to take. And this is going to be similar for any gem you use. Now I already have these memorized because I've done this hundreds of times. So we're just going to do this from memory. So the first thing you have to do is add the gem to your gem file. So we can come down here. And at the bottom, we have our gem file. And then wherever you want to add it, I'm just going to add it at the bottom here. You can say gem devise. We'll save that, and then we can run a bundle install command to install this gem. In my case, it was already installed. Now I'm going to full screen this. So what you need to do now is you need to run a generator, and it's going to be Rails G devise, and the generator. So this G stands for generate. So you can also just type out generate, but you do Rails G devise : install, and that will run an installation for you and then give you some information. So you can see here, it creates an initializers for you and a localization file in your config. We'll visit this initializers in a bit, but basically this is the setup that it runs to make sure everything works. It then gives you some stuff that you can set up to make sure the app works. It tells you to set a default mailer. We're going to skip that step for now, but basically this is one of the steps you take if you want to do your confirm your user registration through email stuff. Next one it suggests is to create a homepage, which we already have. It then tells us that we should use flash messages. So of course we're going to grab these. I'm going to highlight it, right click, and then we can come up to our app, and it's going to be our views, layouts, and application.html.erb. While we're in here, one thing that was brought up last time is the navbar shouldn't be in main. It should actually be inside of our body, but it should also be inside of a header component. So that's just a minor change. And then in our main, because these are going to change based on the page we're on potentially, we're going to put the alerts. Now you could also put them up here under the argument that they're going to largely be the same across all the applications. I actually don't know which way the wind's going to blow on this one for me, but we'll just leave it up here for now. So instead of having the alerts here, I want to render another partial. So I'll say this is going to be the layouts/alerts. partial, which means we have to come into our Explorer and we need to, in our layouts, create a new file, _alerts.html.erb, and then we'll paste them in here. So now what we need to do is generate our user account. So to do this, we can run the Rails G devise model command, but we don't want to generate a model. We want to generate our user. So how do we do that? Well, we can just type Rails G devise user. That will generate our migration, which has our create users migration. It will create a model for us. It'll create our test for us with some fixtures, and all a fixture is just, it's like a, in your test, you need to create a user. This is the file that just creates the user for you. And then it just inserts the models and it routes, or it modifies the routes for us. So, okay, that's pretty cool. Let's now run a Rails db:/migrate command to migrate the database. You can see here it creates the table for the users, adds an index for users and email, makes sure the email is unique, and it adds an index for the users with a reset password token, which is unique. So what does that mean? It means if you have like your recover email, you send them a thing to recover their account, that's going to run through a reset password token. It's going to go through, it's going to find the user based on the reset password token. And it's going to make sure it's unique because it needs to only apply for that user, of course. But what does this look like in our actual migration file? If we open up our Explorer, come down to DB, migrate, and the latest migration, you can see here, this is all the stuff that it added. So here it added the email and an encrypted password. It added the reset token. It added the remembered at. So basically, when you check the box saying remember me or whatever, it has a whole bunch of comments here for other stuff that you can set up, including like your sign in IP, etc. Just be careful. Any data that you track in terms of like sign in IP, if you are serving users in the EU, you might run into issues because you sort of need to deal with GDPR compliance and make sure that you are informing the users and asking their consent to store this data. It's kind of complicated. Highly suggest looking into it. I'm not a lawyer, so I don't know fully. I just kind of do whatever the internet tells me to, which is probably not the best legal action, but anyways. If we come down here, this is for your confirmation stuff if you want to. It also allows you to unconfirm an email. And then you have the ability to lock out an account if someone tries to log in too many times, I think. So basic idea is here, like if you have a really popular streamer on YouTube or on Twitch or like on RuneScape, this was an issue with some players. If someone tried to log into someone's account too many times, it would just lock them out. So this is one way to do that. The issue, of course, is if you're a big streamer and someone reveals your information, someone else can just continuously try to log in and lock you out. So you do want to be careful about how you implement these features. But then you have your timestamps, which you're always going to have timestamps for anything in Rails, really. And then you're going to have your two indexes that we saw being generated. So if we close this, that's enough of me talking. We can then run a Rails S command to start our server, refresh, and nothing really changed here, but you'll see that we had some additional padding, which is right here. And the reason for that is our alert is going to take up space even if it doesn't exist because of how this is styled. So that is one thing you're going to want to take a look at. A good thing to do would be to just create some like a CSS styling to cause this to disappear unless it's being rendered. But you can also probably do some kind of conditional that just says only do this if you have a notice or an alert. So maybe we come up here and we say, I don't know if this will work, but it's a good way to check. So if we say if notice or alert, then do one of these. If we refresh, now we're getting pulled up to the top. So it looks like that worked. So I guess this is the syntax you can use. You can also break it up if you want to render one for each. But let's actually do that. Let's say if notice, do the notice, else if alert, do the alert end, and then we'll refresh. Now we have our routes in our routes.rb, which is going to be in our config. So if I minimize all this, we come into our config and our routes.rb. And here you can see we have our Devise for users. So let's try out these routes. Now I know these off the back of my hand, but we can also just grab them from the console. So if we full screen the console, let me just move this, and then we run a Rails routes command, you'll see that it is a bit messy. So let me zoom out a little bit and run the command again. Looks a bit better. But up here, you see we have a new user session, which is our prefix, which means at the end of this, you need to have _path, and that takes us to the sign in page. We also have a new, new user registration path, which takes us to the sign up page. And then we're going to have a destroy user session path, which is our sign out page. Now there's going to be a little bit extra that we have to get working here to make this work right now. If you're watching this in the future, this step might be completely irrelevant. But the basic idea is with Rails 7, they added turbo support, and right now Devise isn't fully supported with turbo, which means we're going to have to add in a controller and tweak a couple things. But if you're watching this in the future, there is a good chance you don't need to do this step. There is an issue up on the Devise GitHub page right now. I don't remember which issue it is. It looks like it is this issue right here. So 5439. So if you come to the GitHub repo and you find this issue, just check if this one is closed or if it's open. If it's still open, then it hasn't been fixed yet. But you can scroll through and you can see everyone discussing how to fix this, etc. But thankfully, I already have it in my notes. So what happens is if we run a Rails S and we refresh, we can now go to /users/sign_up to take us to this sign up page. Now we can work on formatting this in a minute, but if I just create a fake account real quick, I'll call this test@case.com with a password of password, and I hit sign up. It's going to tell us there's an undefined method user URL. And based on the GitHub issue, what's essentially happening is you have a couple different ways to respond to a request and to generate a response, basically. Generally, this would be just render some HTML for me and redirect me to the home page. But now I think it's running through a turbo redirect because we have turbo in Rails. So we need to come into our app controllers and create a new controller. So we're going to create a new file in here. I'm going to call this, let me open this up in my notes because I'm not super familiar with this. We need to call this file, right click new file, the turbo_devise_controller.rb. And then in here, I'm going to have a snippet of code in the video description, but I'll also full screen this if you want to type all this out. Basically, it's just going to redirect if you have any errors because you're trying to format with turbo. So you don't necessarily need to understand this, but the basic idea is it responds with both HTML and TurboStream instead of just the HTML like it was previously, I think. But this really doesn't matter. This will get fixed in the future and it'll just become another thing that happens in the background with Devise. But okay, let's come out of here because there is another step that we have to do, and it's going to be in our config initializers devise.rb. So in here, if I open this up on my other monitor, at the top, we need to create a new class. So we're going to call this class turbo failure app. And this will also be in the description, failure app. And then in here, we need to do a def respond for the if request underscore format equals turbo underscore stream, then redirect, else call your super, which is just going to be whatever you're extending here. So then we can also do a def skip underscore format question mark. And then we need to do a %w and HTML turbo stream dot include request format dot to underscore s, and we'll get rid of these parentheses here. So I think with that, we then need to come into our setup, and this is going to be our last bit here. We need to say config dot parent underscore controller equals turbo devise controller. So this just sets the parent, of course. We then need to do a config dot navigational formats equals, we're going to do */* comma colon HTML comma colon turbo underscore stream. And then the final part is going to be config.warden do manager. And then in here, we need to say manager.failure underscore app is going to be equal to that turbo failure app that we defined up here. And again, this is hopefully going to be fixed soon. We're still in a new phase for Rails 7. So for now, you're going to have to bear with. But if we refresh, and we try that same account right now, so test@case.com with a password of password, you'll see we get a rollback here. And the reason is that was, I believe, just a JavaScript issue, or that was just a render issue. It wasn't a database issue. So if we, like, for example, stop the server, open up a Rails console, let me full screen this. And then if we do something like @user equals user.first, you'll see that we do have that user in here, which has an ID of 1 generated by default, an email of test@case.com, and it tells us that this was created at this time, updated at this time. So we did actually generate that user. We're not going to be using it. I would prefer to have my own email, so I'll say dean@example.com with the same password of password, and I'll click sign up. I'll actually start the server first, though, because I do know what I'm doing. I'm just testing you. So say password of password, and we'll get redirected to the home page. And you can see in here, it inserted that into the users table with an encrypted password. You also see we have our alert up here, which is pretty neat, or I guess our notice. Now let's add in the ability to log in and sign up and log out into our navbar. So we'll open up our navbar again, which is in our app views layouts navbar. And then down here in our dropdown, I would like our dropdown to be this login functionality. So what we can do, we'll start by just saying, I don't know, user here or something. I don't know, user functionality, just a placeholder. What I'd like to do is, if we are logged in, I want to show this dropdown. So this dropdown with maybe like the username in the future. If we aren't logged in, I just want 2 links, one that says sign up and one that says sign in. So let's start by checking if we're logged in, which is really easy with Devise. So we're going to grab this entire block here from li to li, cut it, and we're just going to say render let's say users or user/session_manager. So now let's come into our folders here in our views. We'll create a new folder, call it singular user. And then in there, we'll right click new file _session_manager.html.erb. And then let's paste this in. Now, what I want to do is first I want to check if I am signed in. So I'll start by saying if current_user. Notice there's no equal sign here. Basic idea, I don't know if I covered this last time, but is if I have something with a variable, let's say I have a counter which is set to 0. If I want that 0 to appear, I leave an equal sign there. If I don't want the 0 to appear, but I want to like check if counter is, I don't know, if counter equals 0, then return true, else return false. So if I want to do something like that, I would of course want to leave this equals as well, but you get the idea. If you're just doing something you don't want to return, maybe you want to set counter equal to 1, then you would not leave that equal sign there. So I don't want the actual logic of this if statement here to return, just the stuff inside of it. So then if we're not logged in, we'll do whatever's down here. So the way this works is Devise gives us a current user account variable. It will evaluate to true if you're logged in. It'll do whatever's in this block right here. This is your I'm logged in block. Else, you're not logged in, and it'll do whatever's in this block. So this is false if you're not logged in. So if you're not logged in, then what we want to do, because we're in this UL here, we want to do the same thing we did with the home, blog, and the about. So we'll copy both of these, come into our session manager, and paste both of these in here. So if we're not logged in, then we want to have the ability to log in. So I'll say this is going to be our sign up link, and this is going to link to the new _user _users, I think, _registrations path. We'll see if that's right. And then this one will be the new _user _session _path. I actually think this needs to be singular. And this will be the login button. So what this is it is the path, the registration is the path to create a new account, and the session is the path for your current account. So when we do the log out button, we're going to call a destroy on the session path, not on the registration path. If you call it on the session path, it just destroys your session and logs you out. If you call it on the user registration path, it destroys your entire account, deletes it, forever gone. You'll never be able to use it again. So make sure you're using session and registration when you mean to. But if I refresh, something's going to be broken here, maybe. If I click on this, we need to actually log out. I forgot that part. So let's come up here. And at the bottom of our dropdown, so below this line, let's just make this the log out button. So in here, below our dropdown divider, let's do a equals, and we'll say link to sign out, destroy user session path. Remember, it's session, not registration. And then to make this work, you need to have the method : space : delete. And because we need this to work with Turbo now, we need to change this to a button to. And the reason is you can only call a get with your link to, I believe. You have to use a button if you want to call the delete method. So now we can take this, let's cut this and paste this in this li, and then we need to add a class to it, which is going to be comma class with a drop-down item in it. So now let's refresh. We'll click this, and we now have our sign out button. We'll click sign out, and here we're getting our error. It's asking, did you mean new user registration path? Because I put registrations. So I guess we can copy that, come up here, paste it in, get rid of this S, save it, refresh again. And now we have our sign up and our login buttons. So I'll click login, dean@example.com with the password of password. Okay, now we have this new post up here. That's fantastic. But of course, we don't want the new post to appear when we aren't signed in. So this should be working, right? Well, sort of. If we copy this URL and then we sign out, we can actually still go there. There's nothing stopping us from going here. So how do we check, make sure that a user is only a signed in user can come here? If we come into our post controller, we have this before action. What we want to do is say before _action authenticate _user. Now this will force us to sign in whenever we try to access this post controller. So if we come back to the home page and we try to go to /post/new, we're apparently running into an issue with our Devise initializer. So if you come back into your config initializers devise.rb, this should be to_s and not to us because it's to string, not to United States. So if I save that and now I refresh, it's still upset. So let me Rails S this. There we go. Now it takes us to our sign in page. So the issue with this is I can't go to the blog anymore without us being redirected. And of course, we want to be able to read a blog post or see all of the blog posts without being signed in. So to do that, we can come back into our post controller, and after the authenticate user, we'll say except %i for the show and the index. So you can't edit, you can't delete, you can't create a new post, but you can see existing ones. So now if I click on blog, that works. And if I come into the show page, that also works. So we can do a couple more things here. The first one is maybe we want to associate a user with a post. So how do we do that? Well, we need to come into our console. We'll clear it. I'll full screen it, bump up the size a bit. We need to generate a migration. So we'll say Rails G migration, and we'll say add user to posts. And maybe we want to say user : belongs _2. So we'll run that, creates a migration. You then come back over to our file here, come into our DB, migration, and take a look. So it adds a reference to the posts for a user that cannot be null, and it is a foreign key true. So that sounds good to me. Let's run a Rails DB : migrate command to migrate the database. And you can see here an error is incurred, and this and all later migrations canceled. A not null constraint failed post.user_id. So the issue here is because we have a not null constraint for this, and we have some posts that don't have a user associated with them, this is now failing. So how do we deal with this? Well, there's a couple different ways you could do it. You could say this shouldn't be null. You can create a on update event listener, but the best way to do it right now, because we're still in a testing stage, is to just run a Rails C. We'll say post.all, or we'll say post.destroy_all to delete all our posts, and then we'll exit out of this. We can then run a Rails DB : migrate command again to migrate our database, and now this works just fine. So alternatively, you could have written some code to just update all your posts, but again, we're seeding the database, so it doesn't matter. Speaking of which, if we now run a Rails DB : seed command, you'll see that we can't do it because we're violating this null violation. So what we should probably do is come into our seeds. So we'll come down to our DB seeds. And what we want to do in here is create a user. So we'll just say user.create. We'll pass it an email, and we'll say this is going to be I'll say dean@example.com email. You can also make this your admin email if you wanted to. And it already knows you need a password of password and a password confirmation of password. So that'll allow you to create your user. And then in here, after the title and the body, we then need to say the user is going to be, actually, let's just do the user ID is going to be the user.first.id. So if we save that, hopefully I did this correctly. Run a Rails DB : seed command to seed the database, and then a Rails S command to start the server, and then refresh this page. Everything seems to be working, but let's display the user. So we can do that by, let me just close all this. Coming into our app, views, posts, and the _post. And then below the title, we'll do a H4 that just says posted by the post.user.email, because we don't want to post the user. We want to do specifically their email so that we can see who posted it. And here we can see that this is not working. So post.user isn't working. Let me open up the model. So let's go into our models, post.rb, and I forgot to add something in here. So because a user can have many posts, we need this to say a post belongs _to a user. So a post has one user that was its creator, and then a user is going to have, or it's going to has many : posts. So that's just how we create that one user to many post relationship. So a user can author many posts, but a post will only ever belong to one user. So if we refresh now, you can see that this title 0 post was posted by test@case.com, and it currently has 0 views. If we click this, refresh it a bunch, you can see that test@case.com is actually doing pretty good with this. But let's go ahead and let's log in to, or let's sign up to a new account. So say dean@example.com with a password of password. Oh, I can't do that. Apparently I'm already signed up. So let's just sign in with this. That works. If we come in here and we click on this post, I can edit this other person's post. That's really not ideal. Kind of an issue. What we would want to do in like a future episode is create some sort of admin functionality so that I can edit other people's posts as an admin, or I can edit them if I'm that user. So that's one thing to keep in mind here. The other thing, of course, is that I can come in here and delete anyone else's posts if I want to in the same way. So you would really want to check if you are the user that was the post of that user. So you would really want to check if you were the author of that post, for example, just to make sure that you've fulfilled whatever requirements there are to delete that post. But for now, this is fine. This is just a basic demo. We'll keep building on this in the future. But one other thing I'd like to take a look at is we're printing out this email. I would actually like to extend Devise to allow us to just create a name, right? It's not going to be a username we log in with, but let's just look at how we would extend it so that we can just use a name here. First thing we need to do is stop our server, and we need to run a Rails G migration. We'll say this is to add name to user, and we'll say name, and it's going to be of type string, but that is by default, so we can actually just put the word string in there. Run our migration, Rails db:/migrate. And then we'll run Rails S to start our server. And then we can refresh. Nothing's changed here. If we come over here and we sign out, we log in at example.com with a password of password. We now need to edit our actual info here. So let's come over to our app views. And how do we do this? Well, we come into our layouts, Navbar, but that's actually going to need to be our session manager. So in our user session manager, what we want to do is in our dropdown, one of the first options here, let's copy this sign out button, replace this first action. Actually, let's replace this second action. And let's say this is to edit account. And this is going to be, just like we had the new user registration path, this is going to be the edit_user_registration_path. It's not going to be a method of delete. And it's going to be a class of dropdown. So let's save that, refresh, come up here, and we now have an edit account button. So click edit account. Oops, this actually needs to be a link to the edit account. Now let's refresh, and we'll click edit account. So in here, this is one of Devise's default views, which allows you to edit your user account information. You can cancel your account if you want to. You can change your email or change your password, and then you'll need to type your current password to update. But how do we actually edit this so we can add in this new stuff that we just made? Well, we need to stop our server, and we need to run a command, which is Rails G Devise:/views. And this allows you to generate your forms that you use to sign in and sign out. So this is where these are coming from. So we now type Rails S, and then I'll minimize this again. I refresh, nothing's changed. But if we come over to our application, our views, we now have a Devise folder, which has a whole bunch of useful stuff. But the two we want to take a look at are going to be registrations and session. So session, this is your login page. It just wants your email and your password and has the remember me checkbox. That's all fine and good, but our registrations edit page is the one we're looking at right now for edit user. In here, what we can do is we can actually just below the email, we'll create another field. And then here we'll say f.label for the name. And then we'll do a BR, just like they did. And then we'll do a f.text_field for the name. And then we'll save that. Now, if we refresh, we'll have this new field here for our name. So we'll say name is going to be Dean, and I'll just type in my current password. If I scroll up here, you'll see that that didn't actually change anything because we have an unpermitted parameter name. Now, in general, in Rails, the way you permit a parameter is in your app controller's post controller. If you scroll down, you can see down here we have def post params where we require a post and then we permit a title and a body for that post. We're not permitting views for the post because we're just updating them ourselves. The user never has to input a view. But for the two things a user can input, we need to permit those. While we're in here, what we can also do is on create, you can say at post.user equals current user. And we can do that because our authenticate user is making sure that we can never come to the create action unless we're signed in. So that will set the user of the post for us, which is neat. Let's now close this. And that was just going to be an issue. If you created a new post right now, stuff would break. So this fixes that creation of the new post. But what we need to do is we need to whitelist that same parameter for our user. And we can't really whitelist that without having a controller. Like here, we just created this controller, but now we need a registrations controller. And we could create a users folder and put the registrations in there, but instead I want to show you a bit of what happens under the hood. So let's come over to our console. We'll close our server, and then we'll run a Rails G Devise :controller, and we'll say users, I think, is what we called our model. Oops, this needs to be Rails G Devise :controllers. And this will generate the controllers that Devise uses under the hood. It also tells us we need to update our routes for these. So let's go do that real quick. If we come down to our config and our routes.rb, after our Devise users, we need to say, controllers. And then we have for our sessions controller, we'll use users/sessions. And for our registrations controller, we'll use users/registrations. So if we come back up here to our controllers and our users controllers, you'll see it generated a few. The one we want to look at right now is going to be our registrations controller. In here, this is going to be all of the code some of the code that is run by Devise. So you can see, just like in your post, Devise for the registration has a new action, a create, an edit, an update, and a destroy. It also has some additional methods in here like the cancel, and then it has some protected stuff. The protected stuff is what we're after here. I want to be able to update my account and allow us some new parameters. So if we uncomment this configure account update params, we see we can permit some additional parameters. So in this keys, we're just going to say permit name. This alone isn't going to work because this needs to be called somewhere. And we can call it up here by uncommenting this configure account update params. Now we also want to configure this to work for signing up. So we also need to uncomment this sign up params, which is going to be this block right here, where we just put the name in as well. So now I believe we should be good to add our name to our user account. To test this, let's replace this user functionality with just the name of our user. So let's come into our session manager, and right here, if we're logged in, we'll just say render the current user.name. And we'll see what that does. So now if we start our server and then we refresh, you'll see nothing is up here right now. But if we come into our edit account, we make this have a name. I'll say my name is Dean, the password of password. You'll now see we have our name being displayed here. If we sign out and we sign up with a new account, let's say jane@doe.com with a password of password, I would actually like to add the username in here. To do that, we come into our app views, Devise, sessions new, registrations new. And in here, we need to do the same thing we did in edit. So if we come into our edit, we have this username. We just copy this. We come over to new. Below our email, we paste it, save this. And then let me just copy my email. I'll refresh. And now we have the ability to put in our name. So I'll say Jane Doe with the password of password. Save that. And now you can see I'm logged in as Jane Doe. Let me sign out and log into my main account, dean@example.com with a password of password. So if you want to do usernames, that's a bit more involved. You're going to do something similar to this, but there's going to be more methods you'll have to override, and you'll have to do some configurations. Like if you want usernames to be unique and you want emails to be interchangeable with them. But the basic idea is if you go to Google and you search for the registrations controller for Devise, let me say Devise registration controller. I'll type create. Hopefully that'll take me to the right spot. Down here, you can see this link, Devise/registrations controller. If I click that, full screen it, you can see this is the actual code that gets run. So when you create a new account and it calls super, it comes into this def create, and then it runs whatever's in here. So a lot of the magic is hidden from you, but it is visible if you just go look for it, like say on GitHub, and you can see exactly what it's doing. So if you wanted to change the specific functionality, like maybe in here you wanted to add a little bit, you would just copy all of this and go paste it into your create method to override this. So it would still work, but you could do your modifications. So it's going to be similar when you override your sign up parameters for your username. You'll just also have to modify how the database is accessed and some other stuff. But that's the basic idea there. Now, the final thing we can do real fast, now that we've tied some of this stuff together and we've exposed some of the secrets here, let's come into our, let's stop our server. We'll run a Rails G controller command. Let me full screen this. I want to generate a users controller, and I want this to be with a profile action. So generate that, and we can exit our full screen. We can come up here to our users controller with our profile action. That seems fine, but now what I want to do is I want to say Rails G migration add underscore views underscore to underscore user views colon integer. I'll say Rails DB colon migrate to migrate our database, and then Rails S to start our server. So in this case, I've done an oopsie. I forgot to do our migration. So let's run another migration. So in this case, I've done an oopsie. So let me stop the server. What we need to do is run a Rails G migration, change views for users. We'll just generate an empty migration. We can come into our DB, migrate, and our last migration here. And we want to change, underscore column for the users, integer, or for the users views integer, and give it a default of 0. So let's save this and run a Rails DB colon migrate command. Now, if we run a Rails S, we should have the ability to modify views for our users. What are we going to do with this? Well, if we come into our routes.rb, full screen this, below our Devise for the controllers, let's do a get for /u/:id, comma, to the user singular profile action. And we'll say as user, and then we'll close this. The reason why I did singular here is because if you make this user's profile, every single user account would work for this. And depending on how you set this up, if your user's name is like sessions, for example, they could potentially break how this will be set up. So for now, just follow along, have some faith, and we'll see if this works. But let's come up to our views. Our users has a view. So let's open this up for our profile. This will be, we'll say %equals, and then we want to do @user.name, and then we'll have an H6 that is going to be @user.views. And then we'll do the same thing we did before. So we'll pluralize this for @user.views, comma, view. We'll save that. Now, if we come over here, refresh, and we come to, let's say, /user/u/1, we have an uninitialized constant user controller. Did you mean users controller? I don't actually know if I did, But let me come into our routes. Yes, this one right here, I think, right? Users profile. So now that worked, and now we have an unidentified name for nil class. And this is because we haven't initialized at user. So if we come up to our controllers, users controller in our profile, what we want to do is say we have a before action, set user. We'll create a private area down here where we def set user. And then we just want to do at user equals user.find with the params ID. And now this should work just like we expect it to. So if we come over here, refresh, we now have our views being displayed, but we don't have a username and our views aren't being updated. So to fix the views not getting updated, we just have to do what we did last time. So we'll say at user dot update views is at user dot views +1. Save that. Refresh. It looks like our at user dot views is nil. So let's do at user dot views dot at user dot update views, set it to 0. Now if we refresh, that should work. Let's try our second user just to see if I'm also broken. It looks like I am. So how do we fix this? Well, we can do let me come down here, stop our server, Rails C. Let's do let me bump this up. User dot all dot each do user dot views equals 0 end. Oops. And we want to do, okay, well, user.views equals 0, user.save, and then we can do our end. So that will update all our users to have 0 views. Rails S. Again, it's not entirely ideal, but it is one way to handle these things. Now, if I refresh, you'll see that the view count just keeps going up. So that's pretty neat. The other thing is now if we come over to our blog, we'd probably want to change this posted by from the email to be the user. So we can do that really fast by just coming over to our app views, posts, our post partial, and changing this user.email to be the user.name. And then we want to change this and make it a link to post.user.name, comma, and we want to go to the user path, I think, and pass in the post.user. So if we do all that, refresh. We need to say link to the post.user.name, but we don't have a username for our first user. So of course, let me stop the server, Rails C, and let me give our user.first a name equal to, let's just say test case. And instead of doing it like this, let's do a user.update name is equal to test case. I think I just set that for everyone, but it's fine just for the sake of this example. So we'll say Rails S, restart the server. I'm now in my dean@example.com. Let me change my name back to Dean. It's like 4:30 in the morning right now. I do apologize. If we come back to our blog, you can now see that we have our test case here. If we click this, it links to our user that created that post. So if I create a new post, say Dean made this with words that go here, create the post, go back to our posts, and it looks like if I scroll all the way down, you can see this was posted by Dean. Okay, last thing we'll do really fast. I know I always say last thing, and then we do 18 last things. If we come into our controllers, our post controller, and our index, we have our post.all. Let's do an order created _at, and we'll do this by DESC. So what does that do? Well, if we now refresh, it orders it by the newest post first. So you can see this number is now going back to the original post of post 0 all the way up to my new post. And that's going to do it for this video. Next time, we'll take a look at creating some comments for these posts and maybe some other cool stuff. And hopefully we can demystify some things with Turbo in the future to make things happen without you needing to refresh the page. That's going to do it for me, though. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in part 3.